36 agus a rís Iram Aramsha le Hamanta Shrita.
Well, yeah, he may Hill. That's Karen Corley. Goodbye, got.
I have to Mary Lou McDonald.
Goodbye, got. Tánaiste, we have just 2 weeks left now in the Dáil term. That is 2 weeks left for government to intervene with measures to alleviate the enormous pressure that the cost of living crisis is placing on households. Yesterday, Ministers Donoghue and McGrath announced to great fanfare that Budget 2023 will be brought forward to September the 27th. Tánaiste, that doesn't mean very much to workers and families who are at breaking point today on the 5th of July. A week is a long time for households when every euro counts. It's a very long time when you can't afford to pay extortionate energy bills, put fuel in the car, or food on the table. So it beggars belief that people who will struggle to make it to the end of this week are asked to wait another 13 weeks for help from your government. This lack of urgency is, I think, especially stressful now for parents who face the most expensive back-to-school period for a generation. And children, as you well know, Tánaiste, go back to school in late August, not at the end of September. The school book lists have already arrived. Bus Éireann has sent out the reminder emails for the fees for school transport. The letters requesting voluntary contributions are on their way. School uniforms, sports and PE gear will have to be bought in the next few weeks, and parents will fork out a small fortune, and many will be forced into debt simply to get their children back to school. These are the households pressed to the brink, and my office is inundated at this stage with calls from families at breaking point, and I'm sure you receive similar calls, Tánaiste. These are calls from families who never thought that they would need support from the state, from charities, much less from food banks to make it to the end of the week. And they have no idea where they will find the money to get their children back to school in September. So September the 27th will be far too late for these families, Tánaiste. They don't have the luxury of waiting another 13 weeks for the government to show up. They need action now. Tá teaghlaí in neireann na feideal le costas scoile ag ordú as cuimse, caithí an rialtas dul in le seo loithreach. Tá mé géirí ar Sína ama thuairt ag an leontas éadaí agus cosfort de sculbhlaíon nua agus é ag ordú chun sus a thuairt de hismaitheoirí atá faoi bhrú milteanach. Sinn Féin will bring a motion before the Dáil tonight. And in that motion are proposals that would ease the financial burden of back-to-school costs and give families a real break in the here and the now. As part of these measures, we're asking government to act immediately to improve the back-to-school allowance in 2 ways, Tánaiste. Firstly, we're asking you to extend the allowance to middle-income households, households that currently receive no state support, but who are pinned to their collar trying to make ends meet. Middle-income households must get back-to-school allowance and that help. And secondly, for low-income families and those on fixed incomes, we want you to increase the back-to-school allowance by 50% to help meet soaring costs of getting children back to school. These are very reasonable asks, Tánaiste. They're sensible asks. They're very necessary, and there is an urgency now in all of this. And if implemented, if you take these decisions, you will make a huge difference at what is a very, very tough time for so many families.
Thanks very much, Deputy. At the outset, I just want to acknowledge that we are experiencing a cost of living crisis. We're seeing inflation at a level that hasn't been seen for nearly 40 years. And while it is driven by international factors in the main, it's very much being felt here at home and indeed in every home across the state. Everyone is feeling the squeeze, and of course those on the lowest incomes are feeling it most acutely. The government response has been dynamic and we have been responsive to the needs of people during this period of high inflation. That started in January when the budget measures kicked in, an increase in the minimum wage, reductions in income tax, increases in pensions and welfare payments, as well as some targeted supports, particularly in relation to the fuel allowance. That was worth about €1 billion. Since then, another €1.4 billion has been given back to people in the form of a reduction in excise on petrol and diesel, a 9% VAT rate on electricity and gas, the lowest VAT rate ever on electricity and gas, €200 deducted from people's bills, cheaper public transport, cheaper school transport, and as well as that, a targeted fuel allowance payment to those poorest families in the state. And over the summer, people will see increases take effect as well. So in the budget, there was an increase in the back-to-school clothing and footwear allowance, a small one based on inflation projections at the time, but families will be receiving that payment starting next week. Over 120,000 families in the state will receive the back-to-school clothing and footwear allowance next week in respect of over 200,000 children. And also, because back to college is expensive as well as back to school, you'll see the changes that were announced in the budget taking effect, an increase in the SUSI grant, more people qualifying for that grant, and the adjacency payments being improved. So a package is in place to help with the cost of going back to school and to help with the cost of going back to college. And that is an increase on last year and will kick in before budget day at the end of September. In September, we will have the budget. There will be two sets of measures that are one-off and can take effect within weeks, meaning that people will have more money in their pockets come the autumn within weeks of the budget being announced. And then the regular actions which take place in January of next year, taking effect thereon. So as you can see, government is responding to this crisis as it unfolds. Action in January, action since January, action over the summer, action again in September, and action again next January. And that's the right approach to it, because this is an unfolding situation, and it's absolutely appropriate that government should help people with the cost of living, given that our economy is strong and we have the financial firepower to do so. But it's also important to point out that no budget on its own is going to enable us to tame inflation. What's required is a comprehensive anti-inflation strategy that involves action at an international level, working towards peace in Ukraine, monetary policy by international central banks. It requires action on European level from the ECB, from changes to the European fiscal rules, state aid rules and other things, and of course action at home, particularly to bring down some of the high structural costs that exist in this country that are out of line with other Northern European countries, such as childcare, for example, to give one example.
Tánaiste, then those high structural costs, as you know, long predate this particular cost of living crunch. I'm sure you'd acknowledge that. Look, I think the government's response to these matters has been slow. I think you've lacked urgency, but we can agree to disagree on that, Tánaiste. What I would like us to agree on is that families preparing now to get children back to school in late August need help and assistance now. So I want to put it to you again that it is crucial that middle-income families have access to a back-to-school payment. You pointed out that there was some improvement at the budget. That now is grossly insufficient. We calculate that there are as many as 500,000 households that need to be given this payment in middle-income brackets, and furthermore, those on lower incomes and fixed incomes need a substantial hike in the level of the payment made to them. So I want to ask you again, if government will move on this urgent matter now, because the children will go back to school in August, and as I described for you, the bills and the pressure for payment is now. It's happening now, and we need action now on these precise measures.
Thanks, Deputy. There's one thing we absolutely agree on, and that's back to school is really expensive for families, and so is back to college as well. That's why there is an increase in the back to school clothing and footwear allowance, which is being paid from next week. It's why there is an increase in the SUSI grant for those going to third level, and it's why we changed the rules only in the last few weeks to allow students to earn more over the summer without it affecting their grant. And these are changes that are taking effect over the course of the summer. But I want to acknowledge, particularly in relation to back to school, that when we made those changes on budget day, we anticipated inflation to be much lower than it is now. And for that reason, Minister McGrath, Minister Humphreys and Minister Foley are in some discussions today and yesterday to see if there's anything we can do to enhance the back to school package, acknowledging that September will come too late for back to school, and that work is underway.